Good morning, Nature School. It's Mr. Mike, and today we're going to be talking about hibernation. But first, I want to tell you happy first snow. It's an excellent snow. Where I'm at currently, we have about 8 inches of snow, so it's pretty good. And it's funny that we're talking about hibernation. That's what all of these animals are preparing for, are days like this, when it's cold, there's not a lot of food available, and they need to hunker down. So we're getting back to that question, what is hibernation? And what is true hibernation for some animals? So sometimes we get a little bit confused when people say, oh, they're a true hibernator or they're not a true hibernator, because not all animals take a big long sleep for 6 months like you think they would, which is what most people associate with hibernation. Hibernation is basically periods of sleep or low levels of breathing, and their heart rate gets really low, and they're kind of saving their energy or storing it so they can make it last over a long period of time. They're not really sleeping the whole way through. They're just kind of storing energy for when it gets very, very cold and they need to use that energy. Hibernation is when an animal takes long periods of sleep or is inactive during the short days of winter. Because it's cold, there's not a lot of food for them, so they have to conserve and treat that energy that they have very preciously. So some animals don't hibernate at all, for example, like most birds. They're constantly going around looking for seeds and things all throughout trees, or woodpeckers digging into trees and finding grubs and insects that are in there. So not every animal is able to hibernate. The ones that do, when you think about it, usually tend to be pretty small. Humans are unable to hibernate. The only large animal that we can think of that's able to hibernate, can anybody think? That's right, if you said bears, they're probably our largest animal that hibernates. All kinds of animals hibernate. Bats, insects, spiders, all kinds of things take long periods of rest to conserve energy throughout the winter. Reptiles, amphibians, all kinds of different things. And we're going to talk about those today. So, why do animals hibernate? Because there's a variety of food and things that they rely on throughout the spring and summer and fall that's no longer available. So how do they do this? In late summer and fall, basically what these animals will do is they'll gorge themselves and build up a nice big fat layer. And that fat layer, for these mammals usually, will help to sustain them throughout the winter. There aren't a lot of animals that are true hibernators. And when I say that, you're probably wondering what I mean. True hibernator would be somebody that sleeps for a long period of time without waking up at intervals to eat or to find food. Animals aren't really hibernating because they're tired or they need a really long nap. They're doing this to conserve energy that they couldn't normally get throughout a cold, harsh winter. What happens is their heart rate and their blood flow and their heartbeat all get very, very low. So does their breathing rate. Everything slows down so they're able to conserve or use very little of that energy, so they're not having to wake up in as many intervals or wake up at all in some cases. Some animals hide and store food in the summer and fall to prepare for these long stretches of winter. Can we think of an animal that might hide food for later? I knew you would know it. That's right. If you said squirrels or chipmunks, those are two excellent animals that are really, really good at hiding food for the winter. So they build their nests in the summer and fall, which they usually spend most of their time in. And then they'll start to store and cache food in different locations. One, so it's not stolen by other animals, or in some cases other squirrels, and they also so they can eat later and have plenty of fat, because they're not able to build up a big fat layer like a bear or a raccoon could, because they're so small and they eat a very specific food, or they're mainly vegetarians. Other animals are omnivores and they have other choices for food. Alright, let's talk about reptiles. What do? Because there's not going to be a ton of food for them, and if they come out, they're not going to be able to survive this really, really cold winter. They don't have any fur to keep them warm. They're cold-blooded, meaning that they rely on the sun and external things to keep them warm. So what do? Well, it's pretty simple. Most snakes, like a garter snake, for example, that we have here in Ohio, go and find a den with other garter snakes, sometimes in groups of 8,000. That's the largest groups that they found. And what they do is they basically huddle together throughout the winter for warmth. Now, they do spend the summer, late summer and fall building up a good reserve, but they're able to lower that metabolic rate, or the energy level that they have, drop it way, way down with their body temperature, and they're able to survive through the winter in these large groups where they can keep warm. We're back at the Frost Center, and we're going to be talking about box turtles a little bit, and how box turtles and other reptiles are a little bit different from animals that hibernate. Box turtles don't truly hibernate. They do what's called bromate. It's a little bit different. They're kind of sluggish and completely inactive. So some of these smaller animals and mammals and things are building up that big fat layer like we talked about. But what the turtles are doing, and other reptiles are doing, they're basically emptying out their guts. So, a week or two before they really start to get into the ground, they will stop eating. And once they stop eating, then they know it's time for them to start shutting down and slowing down their heart rate, their metabolism, and all those other things that would normally need to be very high for them to survive. So what the box turtles then do is they bury themselves down into the soil in the fall, and then as fall gets deeper into winter, they'll start to dig down and bury down even deeper as the frost sets in and it gets a little bit colder. And then as it starts to get warmer and the days start to get longer, they start to move back up to the surface, eventually making it to spring. Now I bet you're wondering, do our box turtles here at the Nature Center hibernate? And the answer is no. We use a specialized light back here and keep them fed all the time so that they kind of skip it. These are education animals, or animal ambassadors, that we use throughout the year, and for them to be acclimated or just to drop back off outside, they probably wouldn't make it through hibernation. Wild, non-domesticated box turtles are ectothermic, meaning that they rely on the sun and other things to keep them warm. So they can't regulate their body temperature the way they would like to. So they have to keep themselves warm underneath the ground at a constant temperature, or a more controlled temperature than it would be above ground in the wintertime. And there's not a lot of food for them. Between insects, earthworms, mushrooms, all the other vegetation that they eat, there's just not enough throughout the winter for them to survive, and there's just not enough heat for them to stay warm. Now let's talk about amphibians. What do? Well, we have one special amphibian that kind of does things a little bit different than all the other ones. Some of them burrow down under the soil, kind of like reptiles do, and they'll stay there and wait out the winter in a group or somewhere where it's a little bit warmer and it won't freeze, a little bit deeper down in the ground. But the wood frog, like this one, is a pretty fascinating animal. They're able to almost completely freeze themselves, which almost completely stops the blood flow, stops the heartbeat, and they're basically able to take a frozen nap, essentially. So what they do is, once they start to sense that it's getting very cold and the temperatures are going to drop really, really low, they bury themselves in the soil, and then they're able, or the leaf litter in some cases, then they have a special chemical in their body that allows them to basically freeze. All the water in their body, almost all the water, not all, will freeze, and then they'll be able to kind of wait out the winter. Once spring comes, then they thaw out once the warm weather comes, and then they'll go back to their lives just like they did before, eating and finding a mate just like that. And this one, check this out, this is really cool. Land snails tend to be one of my favorites to talk about when we talk about hibernation. So what they do is once they sense that it's getting cold, so late in fall when you really start to see temperatures drop below the 40s, they'll basically crawl up to a spot that's in cover, usually some leaf litter or a dead tree, and then they'll say, hey, this is a good spot, and then they'll take and cover themselves in their slime. completely. Even the covering of their shell and where they can tuck themselves back in, they'll cover themselves in this slime, and then they're able to last for 4 to 6 months safely encased in that slime and wait out the winter. Pretty fascinating, isn't it? And lastly, Nature School, we have bats. Well, not all bats per se. Ones that live in South America and Mexico and other places, they really don't have the same climate or the same temperatures or the same winters that we have, so they don't have to worry about finding food. At least the ones in Ohio hibernate, and throughout a lot of the United States. What they do is there are true hibernators. They're ones that are able to shut it all the way down, basically. They lower their body temperature, which is something unheard of in mammals. So they lower their body temperature very, very low, and then they're able to decrease that body temperature, which decreases the need to burn and use energy. So their metabolism is now extremely low, and they basically take a 6-month nap. They're one of our true hibernators. Now, why might a bat not be able to make it through the winter? If you said because they eat insects and other things, you're exactly right. All the insects are doing the same thing. They're hibernating, or they're pupating, or they're laying in the ground, waiting to emerge in the spring when the weather gets warmer. So bats have to do the exact same thing. Everybody's choice for hibernation or adaptation for hibernation is strictly based on food availability. That's why some animals even migrate. Birds, for example, they migrate because there's not enough food for them in their breeding ranges. All right, Nature School, now it's your turn to show me some animals that you think might hibernate. So what I want you to do is share some pictures, you can find them anywhere, of animals that you think might hibernate. All right, Nature School, I'll catch you guys next time, and hopefully you guys had a good time, and you guys can go out and find some animals that might hibernate and learn about those, because we've shared some cool facts. Now you guys can share some with us. All right? See you later, Nature School. Pound it.